Master Gardeners. Here I am in my own yard, and I was intrigued by this winter mushroom that's growing on a stump in my own yard. So out of curiosity, I started asking around and asking people what kind of mushroom would be growing in winter. Here it is December 30th in Maryland, and this has been actively growing for the last 4 weeks. It's actually at its final stages. So it's a shelf type of a mushroom, started out sort of a gray color, really doesn't have any kind of stalk on it. And after looking it up, I think it's the tree oyster mushroom, which is pretty fascinating that it grows in such a cold time of the year. The science name is Pleurotus ostreatus. Ostreatus it is. So anyway, how does it grow? What's it doing? Well, it's a thief. All mushrooms are thieves. It's consuming this maple tree, breaking it down, and eating it. The way you're supposed to be able to tell this oyster mushroom is it's in a layered form, and I broke this piece off if you want to come up and look. It has gills. It hardly has any kind of a stalk on it at all, and oftentimes the stalk is off center. And this is a pretty old one, but definitely a brownish in color. It's been being eaten by some rodents and things. And this is actually the second most grown mushroom in the United States, one of the edible forms. So I don't recommend that you eat this unless you're traveling through the woods with a mycologist. Don't bother to collect this because there are poisonous lookalikes like this guy. But they grow through temperate climates in the United States. But what's fascinating and what I learned about this thing is it's not just eating the stump. It's actually what nightmares are made of. This guy is not only a thief, it's a murderer. It has the capability of consuming and eating nematodes. Like, what's a nematode? A nematode are all these little invisible worms that live in our soil, and they're parasitic ones that eat plants and things, but they're little worms. And they're all over the environment, all over. Every ecosystem has these little nematodes, these little invisible tiny worms. And this mushroom is capable of catching them and eating them, consuming them, murdering them. So how can a mushroom do that? You can think of carnivorous plants like the Venus flytrap that you've seen before in plant stores, and carnivorous plants that are pitcher plants. They dissolve insects because they need nitrogen and micronutrients that they can't get from their environment. Well, the same thing is true of this mushroom. It's consuming this wood, but it lacks nitrogen. And they think that that's why this plant is capable, or this fungus is then capable of killing nematodes and eating them from the inside out. So how do they eat these guys? There's all different kinds of, on the internet you can watch videos on how these guys, there's 160 species of fungus that are capable of eating nematodes. So that's only like smaller than 1% of all mushrooms that are capable of doing this. But it's pretty fascinating. So how do they do that? They can make little glue traps, little networks, and the nematode can swim into the network, and then they get stuck to the net, and then it begins to dissolve it. And then the other way is some of them have contracting rings where the mushroom has little hyphae. We don't call them roots, they're hyphae. And it makes hyphae in a little loop around, and the nematode will happen to swim through it, and then it'll lock down, and within a minute or two, it begins to digest that little worm. Ugh, gag me. And then another thing is some of them create little knobs that have little sticky points on the tips of their knobs. They're like little spiny balls. And those little spiny balls can stab the nematode. And as it stabs it, it has a really strong toxin that then slows the nematode down, and it can actually penetrate the cuticle of the nematode and eat him. So lots of fascinating methods that these guys can strangle their prey or catch them. But who thought this little mushroom could be a murderer right in my own yard? How about that for some stories, Mr. Gardeners?